everybody. We are just getting started here. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Erin Potter, and I work with the project teams here in the Transportation Division on community engagement. I did want to acknowledge first that I know that there is a lot going on in our community and nationwide, and with the trying events of the past 2 weeks layering on top of the past few months of the global pandemic, it's a difficult time to do a lot of things. So we really do appreciate you joining us, whether it's live or by viewing this recording later. Being able to share the concept designs and get your feedback is a really important part of what makes Arlington County what it is. Your input is valuable, and it has helped the team to develop the concept plans that you'll see today, and will help them refine them as we look to meet our community goals and needs in the Transportation Division. While we generally host meetings like this in person or at pop-ups, the current guidance on public meetings from the county board and the guidance from Governor Northam means we're online again for our second touch point on these 3 projects. If you joined us last time, welcome back. If you're new, welcome. Online meetings have been part of what we do for community engagement for a little while now. And most everyone's probably had like a Zoom call with their friend or their grandma at this point. But I do know that this is probably still new for some people and is certainly still new for community engagement, and so we're still learning. I appreciate your patience and flexibility, and definitely am interested in what we could do to make this better. I'm getting a note that we've lost audio. Is anyone else experiencing audio problems?
Not me. I can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Maggie.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So that might be on your end. Sorry, friends. But we will post a recording of this. So if you are having audio trouble, you'll still be able to. Okay. So I just want to cover a few things before we start, and I hand things over to the project team. What you're looking at here. Oops, sorry, stay on that one, Dan. So this is our overall agenda for our brief time together. Welcome and housekeeping is where we're at now. Then we'll do a street maintenance program overview and how complete streets and street maintenance fit together. And those are really the background information that we want you to understand what this program can and sort of can't do. If you joined us for the first one, that's going to look pretty similar, but we do want to make sure that everyone has sort of the baseline information about what we're able to do with this program. From there, we'll move on to the team members, and they'll share the concept designs that they've got, and then we'll give you sort of the highlights of it, and then we'll talk about how you can help us out by sharing further feedback online, and then we'll end with a Q&A. So Dan, now you can. So this is just to cover the team's live platform if you've not utilized it before. So there's 2 little images there on the side, and they're both about how to use the question and answer features. If you can see a gray bar on the side, all you have to do is type your name and enter a question there, and you should be good to go. If you don't see that side gray bar in the first image, go up to the top of your sort of panel there, and there's a series of small icons, and right next to the one that says leave, don't do that, we want you here, but there's a little chat bubble back and forth, and you click that and it will open the Q&A feature. You can ask questions, type questions in there at any time during the presentation, but we will sort of hold all of them to the end. Then I just want to do a quick, we'll have the team members. Oh, we didn't put Sergio on there. So we've got a bonus team member for you. So why don't I just let, so there's Dan Neighbors who's here. You'll hear from him first. There's Maggie Freeman, Kevin Cassidy, myself, Erin Potter, and then we do have Sergio on the line as well, who will be talking to us about the Wilson project. So that's on me, Sergio, for not putting you up there, but he's here with us too. Okay.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introductions, Erin. Like Erin had mentioned, this is our second meeting for the 2020 marking season. And we did present some of this information on during the first meeting, but I'll go through it really quickly just in case you missed that first meeting. I will also say we did talk about 2 other projects in the first meeting. Those were Military Road and Lorcom Lane. And those we actually started engagement last year in 2019. So we had engagement in 2019. And then the second engagement for those two projects were the first meeting for the 2020 marketing season. And those projects are complete now. So you won't see those. We won't be talking about those tonight because they're complete.
They're implemented. You can go out and look at them.
Yes. But all the other projects that we discussed in the first meeting, we will talk about today. We got some really good feedback, and we will go over that in a little bit. But first, let me go through the project background a little bit more. These things are not popping up in front of people. Okay. So basically, the program is Arlington County maintains about 376 miles of roadway. That's maintained by our Water Sewer Streets Department. And what we do is we look at when the streets are identified for repaving. We look at how we can improve the markings, how we can improve signage to improve overall multimodal use, operations, safety, just look at for opportunities. So the streets, when we decide what is going to be included on the list, Water Sewer Streets does this analysis where they look at the pavement condition, and it gives a score called a pavement condition index. So the streets that have the highest need for repaving are those streets that are selected for repaving. And again, what we do, DOT, we look for opportunities for making the street work better for everybody. So how does resurfacing and remarking the street help with community goals? Well, there's a key phrase there that's in quotes. We look for ways to enable safe access by all user groups, including pedestrians, bicyclists, transit vehicles and users, and motorists of all ages and abilities. So again, we're looking at meeting our overall transportation mission, which is outlined in master transportation plans. We're always trying to look for ways to improve safety, improve walkability, drivability, walkability, transit use. We're looking at making the streets better for everyone. So again, I did already talk about our first meeting was in April. So that's past, looking at the bottom page. And now you see the little arrow pointing to where we're at. Late spring 2020, kind of summer. But this is where we are now. And what we're ready to do is we took the feedback that we got from you after the first meeting. We put together some concept designs. We're going to present those designs tonight. And then we will have a question and answer period at the end of this session tonight after we present the designs. And then we will have an open period for further written and engagement feedback as well. That's generally the process we're following. I did show this at the first meeting as well. The map of Arlington on the left is simply just showing all the streets that are on our network, and the ones that are in red are those that are scheduled for repaving this year. And then the graphic on the right just shows the 3 key streets where we're looking for specific opportunities to evaluate how we can improve safety and operations. Those 3 streets that we're going to go through in order is Clarendon Boulevard, Wilson Boulevard, and Potomac Avenue. So just a brief overview of some of the opportunities that we see when we do remarking of the streets. We look for ways to improve pedestrian safety. You see the graphic on the top right there that shows us putting in some mark space with bollards to shorten that crossing distance, to provide less exposure for pedestrians as they're using that crossing. Same goes for the graphic on the bottom as well. That shows a kind of temporary island, if you will, median cut-through island. Again, we do these to help define space to help separate modes. This way, vehicles aren't turning through this space, and it provides somewhat of a refuge for pedestrians as they cross. The graphic on the top you see is a protected bike lane, and that's basically moving. When we install a protected bike lane, we move the bikes to the curb adjacent to the sidewalk, put in a buffer space, and then as a parking space. So again, the whole principle of separating modes applies here, where the vehicle traffic, the moving vehicle traffic, is separated from the moving bicycle traffic. And then on the bottom there, simply, we do things that improve operations for vehicles too. This is putting in a yield point where there was a confusing merge in Roslyn. So again, there's a lot of tools we can use. This is just kind of a brief overview. And you can see here in this graphic, taking those 4 images that I showed you, is you look across the top there, and you see that there's multiple things, multiple benefits from each of these. Most of them, of course, help improve pedestrian crossings. All of them provide separation. Again, if you have separation, the idea is you have fewer conflicts. All of them also help reduce or control vehicle speeds by leaving less wide open space where vehicles can drive more randomly. 2 of those, the bump outs and the improved traffic controls, improve sight lines, and in general, the improved traffic controls also make the street easier to understand for all users. So a lot of multiple benefits you can get from these types of measures.
And I think the only thing I would add here, Dan, is that one of the reasons I want to show you this is all stuff that the team has done in markings and bollards. So all this stuff can be implemented through the restriping and remarking program, which is what we're talking about now. So it's less curb work, ramp work, any of that, but we can still get a lot of those community benefits that we might have to wait to build out fully in the short term.
Yep, absolutely. That's a good point, Aaron. It's trying to find an opportunity to do something more immediately. We identify a need, then it gives us the opportunity to do something rather quickly. So there's the general background. We're going to turn it over to each of the designers for each of these projects to talk about their specific streets that they looked at the feedback, looked at some of the background information, and then took that to create designs. So the first person that's up is Maggie. Maggie, Clarendon Boulevard.
I'm here.
Welcome.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. We compiled all your concerns, and kind of the 3 things that we came up with were visibility at crosswalks, especially at roads in Oak, and the desire for additional separation between people driving and biking, and understanding the right-of-way at 17th and Street North, the merge area. We hope we can implement the changes we've made here to make it much easier to do all of those things. Should we go through the goals and guidance?
No,
Go.
I think they've seen it before.
Okay. Okay. So go to the next slide then. Okay. So this is what we started with down here at Road Street. We in that first block we put protected bike lanes, which means putting the bike against the curb and moving the parking lane out. Also, we moved parking back a little bit so that at Quinn Street you could have a better sight line trying to pull out of there. So we continued that protected bike lane. We enhanced all the crosswalks to have high visibility crosswalks. We went to the next block and had the same new protected bike lane with the bikes against the curb again, and not losing any parking there. And actually, I think we gained a spot there. So those first 3 blocks, as you can see, are all protected bike lanes, all parking pulled out and the bicyclists to the curb. We have consistent lanes, driving lanes throughout here so that there's room for buses and larger vehicles. What else? I think you could go to the next. And then when we passed Pierce here, we had our width was diminished a little bit because of a couple of things, a bus stop, and I think it's there's a bike shelter there, or bike thing. So we came to the buffered bike lanes. We switched at that point to buffered bike lanes, where we have the separation between the bike lane and the travel lane. And we retain parking all through this area here. And then as we approach 17th Street, we tried to add a lot of signage and a lot of markings, trying to bring attention to that and make the turn into there a lot tighter so that people are slowing down and they're seeing the bikes that are going through that intersection. Hopefully this tightening up will make people more aware of the bicycles traveling around there. And we used a lot of green paint here as well, so that's to get people's attention as well. And then the way up the hill there, we finished with buffered bike lanes up to Oak Street. Still maintaining, good travel lanes for buses and vehicles, and a little bit wider parking lanes on the north side to accommodate some of those businesses. So if you can look down at the typical cross section, it tells you exactly the lane widths, the parking lanes, the bike lane, and the buffer. That gives you a good idea how it's all set up. You want to add anything, Dan?
Sure. Well, thank you for running through the design there, Maggie. Just kind of an overview of how we were able to fit in, like Maggie described, these 3 blocks here from Rhodes to Pierce, protected bike lane, and then buffered bike lanes from Pierce to Oak. We were able to do that by standardizing the lane widths. There's a lot of variations in the lanes along this roadway. So what we're able to do is, basically stick with, as you can see here in that cross section on the lower right of the screen, you have 2 11-foot lanes basically we were sticking with, whereas before we had variations from 15 to 10 feet. So with that space that was excess, we're able to kind of fit in the additional protection as Maggie described. The other thing too, I'll just note, is that we retain most of the parking. 71 spaces are retained here, and like Maggie said, on the east side, or excuse me, the north side, there's basically no change to the parking on the north side, with minimal change to the parking on the south side of the street. The last thing I will just emphasize is that one of the things we talked about as we kicked off was the idea of providing separation between modes by standardizing those lane widths. I don't know if you can see the cursor here, but you look kind of in the middle of the screen where it says greater separation for the 17th Street North transition. What we're able to do is pull the through lane farther away from the bike lane. So like Maggie described, it's we're providing more buffer space, and as the vehicles are turning, we're putting in indications that they have to yield to the bicyclists. So we're assigning right of way there. The bicyclists have right of way over the vehicles. So that's kind of one of the key things that we heard as well through the first comment period, and something we were able to address. So I think that's pretty much sums it up. we can go on to the next one. Thank you, Maggie, for presenting this plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up we have Sergio, who put together this plan for Wilson Boulevard.
All right, thank you. Good evening. As the team said, I'm Sergio Vercochea. I'm a design engineer for traffic engineering operations. I'll be talking about Wilson. And from the last meeting, we received 20 plus comments regarding corridor-wide concerns and desires. And I've listed out the main points. Really, the first one is a desire for continuation of some type of bike facility on the corridor. Currently, on this segment, we do not have bike lanes. The next one is concerns regarding speeding. We collected data, and you'll see in another section below, the 85th percentile speed is kind of high when the posted speed limit is 30. We're seeing that 85% of the motorists are going either 39 miles per hour or lower. The next desire was for safer pedestrian crossings. And then lastly, we had some comments specifically for North Larimore Street, and those were regarding concerns about if motorists understanding each other. And this is kind of typical at wide intersections or where you have one lane section going into two lanes, which is how it is today. Some points about the existing conditions. I said a couple things already about the speed, but generally the corridor is 4 travel lanes, 2 lanes in each direction, and it's separated by a median. We do see curbside parking as well as curbside transit stops. When we looked at the volumes, we saw that generally this corridor along this segment receives 15,000 vehicles a day. And we also took a look at crashes, and we saw a majority of the crashes are angle and rear ends, and they are happening mostly at the intersections. TNO did coordinate a study on existing conditions of this corridor, and we learned a number of things. We learned that parking demands are low, especially in specific sections east of North Lebanon Street. We also learned that the level of service of the intersections that are signalized and unsignalized along this corridor are operating at acceptable measures. And we also learned some more about the crashes, but I think the biggest point was that the roadway's capacity right now exceeds the traffic demand that it's receiving. With this knowledge, what can we do in the short term? And I'll be talking about that in the next slides, but really what we can do is reconfigure the roadway to add new facilities and safer facilities. So as I said, one of the biggest desires was that there was no bike lane connection or bike lanes along this corridor. And we do see bike lanes on Wilson east of Manchester Street, but there are none between Patrick Henry or the county line and Manchester Street. So with this knowledge, we were able to come up with a concept that is changing the roadway from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction, and we'll be providing better bike facilities and better transit stops. If you can go to the next slide, please. Here, this next slide, I'm showing some of the current treatments that we did test out in areas of Wilson Boulevard east of Manchester. You'll see that on the images on the left, we have a 4-lane section that we changed into a 3-lane section. So it's 1 lane in each direction with a 2-way left turn lane. And similar to the example Dan was talking about earlier, we have another section on Wilson east of Manchester where we added these islands, these marked islands. And we did these in areas where we noticed that there were low left turning traffic, as well as where we noticed that there was high ped crossings, and this might be due to transit stops. And we've been having really good success with these, and at times we are building them out. And you can see that at Livingston we had something marked and with bollards, and we built that out with concrete. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm showing the concept, the proposed concept. As I said, it's going to be 1 lane in each direction, which allows us to provide more space for other facilities. So we'll see new buffered bike lanes in the eastbound and westbound direction, enhanced markings for the bus stops. You know, we have areas where the buses will be crossing paths with the bikes. So we are using green markings as well to show where these conflict areas might be. And through the study, we also learned that Patrick Henry should be a cutoff point for this roadway reconfiguration. So we are maintaining a 4-lane configuration past Patrick Henry. Next slide, please. Throughout the corridor, we are trying to maintain a 12-foot travel lane, as well as a buffer of 3.5 feet, and then bike lanes that are 6 feet, and then a parking lane around 8 feet. So nothing is at its minimum. We have space to accommodate these widths, and you'll see along this segment that we're continuing the treatments that we saw in the previous slide, some enhanced bus stop markings, and these green markings are also being used at high ped trip or high ped generator locations. This area of the corridor has the shopping center. It also has a skate park. It also has a pool. So in these areas where we notice a lot of vehicle traffic crossing over a potential bike lane, we decided to mark it green to just show further notification of a conflict area between bicyclists and motorists. You'll also note on the east side of the slide that we have removed the bus stop at North Liberty Street. We have been coordinating with WMATA and ART Transit, and they have shared the ridership numbers and agreed that these can be eliminated, which can provide more on-street parking space. So we've done that with this concept. On the next slide, I'm showing we're going further east towards Manchester, but right here is where we're at Larimore, and we're continuing the buffered bike lane treatments as well as the bus stop markings. And actually in this area, it's a little different because we do not have as much width to fit a bike lane by itself and then a bus stop. So you'll see in the eastbound direction that we are mixing the buses with the cyclists just in this area, just due to width not being there. And then as you move further east from Larimore, we have the new eastbound buffered bike lane. We have one today going uphill westbound. So just that eastbound portion will be new. And then as we continue to Manchester Street, we will be adding new shared lane markings and signage for that new buffered bike lane in the eastbound direction, and we'll be tying into existing facilities that are on Wilson today, which are the bike lanes and reconfiguration of the roadway, where it went from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, and then 1 lane for 2-way left turn lanes. And here I have some of the concept design summary points. Really, it's the biggest win with this concept is the addition of a bike lane in an area for, I think it's around a half mile. So we will be having not just standard bike lanes, but we have the width for buffered bike lanes in the eastbound and westbound direction. Also, we will have better bus stops, and they will be more delineated so that people know what their exact area, and also that cyclists know where they can be conflicting with the bus stop going curbside. Another benefit of this concept is that we're standardizing travel lanes. As was said earlier, we did have wide lanes along this section, and we're trying to accommodate 12-foot lanes for transit, since we know this is heavily used by transit, and also school buses, since there's a school bus, or no, there's a school very nearby by Manchester Street. And lastly, regarding parking, with this reconfiguration, we are actually adding 1 spot, so it's a net gain of 1. But I think it should be said that, you know, we're not really eliminating any parking, but we will be gaining 1 spot. And I would like to say that we are continuing to continue the treatments of the marked curb extensions that you have seen already east of Manchester Street on Wilson Boulevard, and we'll be proposing those for some of the side streets along this corridor. Anything the team wants to add?
No, that's a good detailed run through the design, Sergio. Yeah, I think that covers it. I will say that one of those locations that was where we did do the bump outs with the delineators was converted into a hardscape change, as you can see here. Arlington Middle Drive, that was actually changed to hardscape change. So those are future opportunities that could be realized during the course of this type of project. But again, for this year, we're focusing on the repave and remark. Okay, so we will go to the next street where Kevin will present his design there. I can advance the slides.
There you
There we
go.
go.
Hello, everyone, for joining us. We compiled some of the comments that you guys gave us last time on Potomac Ave. Some of the main concerns that we saw were a desire for improved connectivity from Crystal Yards to Potomac Yards to Crystal City. There were issues with vehicles blocking the existing bike lanes, particularly in front of the hotel. There we see a heavy use of shuttle buses there, and because of the larger widths, they would overhang into the bike lanes. On the west side, there is a missing block of sidewalk due to that area not being developed yet. And then these last two issues were ones that we have noted down, but they will not be handled as part of the Potomac Avenue repaving. But there are issues that we'll explore handling as just part of our normal striping enhancements. I think most of the other stuff on this page is things that we had talked about in the previous meeting, but we left up so that anybody who didn't join for the first one could still see this information. We can go to the next. Okay. So this is starting towards the southern end, which is closer to the Arlington County Alexandria border. Due to some of the higher volumes on Potomac Avenue, particularly during the AM, as we approach Glebe, we had to maintain 2 northbound travel lanes in order to operate at a decent level of service there. But after that, we narrowed the section down to 1 northbound lane and also 1 southbound lane. This allowed us to add in a northbound protected bike lane from that stretch all the way up to just prior to the intersection with Crystal Drive. There we also need to maintain two lanes, so we go back to the existing condition, but you'll see that on the next slide. Southbound, we also tried to keep this treatment consistent from Crystal Drive all the way down to Glebe, where we added this, which I guess is unusual and probably one of the only locations we'll have this, but it's a double buffered bike lane in order to try to define that space a little bit better, as well as expanding all of the parking that is on the west side from 7-foot spaces to 10-foot wide spaces. That should allow any vehicle to park within that area and not spill over into the bike lanes and give plenty of room for any door swing. Of note is one of the main complaints or concerns that we saw in this area was that lack of northbound connectivity on the sidewalk. So knowing that this will be temporary, we're going to remove the parking that is in that section and add in a buffered sidewalk on street throughout that area. With the hopes that once that site plan comes in, we will get that full built out sidewalk, but that should help with that connectivity. We do have a net gain of parking throughout this stretch. That's mainly due to the fact that we're adding parking on the east side, which doesn't currently exist. So even with the removal of the parking on the west side, we have a substantial gain. I think we have what is it, 36? Around 36 spots. Yep. Go to the next. So as I mentioned before, we kept a very consistent section throughout this whole corridor. You can see on the top left side of that continuation of that on-street sidewalk, the large parking lanes and that double buffer on the southbound side. And then, as I mentioned before, as we approach Crystal Drive, we do need to maintain the 2 travel lanes. So the protected bike lane does end and then transitions back to just a standard bike facility. Pretty much
it.
section.
Okay, so then this is just sort of a restatement of that sort of earlier timeline to let you guys know where we are. So you just heard everybody learn more about the project concepts and following up on the early spring meeting. So you can see we really used your feedback. So thank you for providing that. And we look forward to your additional comments on these. What will happen from here is that we'll have that comment period open until I think it's June 18th. And then the team will take that feedback and develop final concepts, and then we'll share those out. Those designs will be available to you online, and then the projects will be implemented this summer and fall. So very exciting potential. Can you get to the next one? So if you guys gave feedback last time, we used a tool called Conveo, and one of the pieces of feedback that I got last time was, hey, show us what Conveo looks like. So this time you'll get, we'll be sharing out a link. It'll go on the project page along with all the concept designs if you want to make them bigger and look at them. But we'll also be collecting feedback through SurveyMonkey, and then once you're in SurveyMonkey, when you're done, it will launch the Conveo tool. And Conveo really, if you've come to an Arlington public meeting and you've done the sort of thing where you look at a plan and you put a Post-it note on it, Conveo really helps us mimic that tool. It makes it pretty useful for the project team because then your specific location-based feedback about the plan is tied to the actual location. So this is a screenshot from the last round of engagement about Clarendon Boulevard. So you can see all the little dots of where people were telling us what their current experience of Clarendon Boulevard is. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure to show you guys that. And yeah, that tool we'll be sharing out to the stakeholder list and put up on the project page tomorrow. If you want to get added to that stakeholder list, you can of course drop your email in the chat box. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. And then, so now we're going to go in the question and answer section. And I know that some of you have already been putting questions in, which is great. I appreciate that. Just a reminder, this is the 2 images for how to ask questions if you haven't been able to yet or been able to figure it out. So again, it's you've already got the gray bar up, you're good to go. You can type in there. If you don't, the black box with the little question and answer thing up there. So if we go scrolling up in your questions, oh yeah, and so some of you have been very clever and been telling me this pertains to Clarendon. If it was an order, I can pretty much guess, but if you're typing in a question now, if you make sure to clarify which place you're looking at, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and you gave me some questions here.
Yeah.
I'll start with some of these. There was a question about if we looked at NACTO guidance, which of course we did in designing the different elements that you see here. I'll note that, one of the committees that I serve on the NACTO committee to the National Uniform National Committee of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's a mouthful. So, with my experience there, we're looking at things that are beyond current NACTO too. So, we're trying to not limit ourselves by NACTO or by the Federal Highway Administration or anything, but we're looking at what is the context of each of these applications and trying to put in the best facility for that specific application. But yes, we're obviously familiar with NACTO, and a lot of what we've done is founded in a lot of the principles of NACTO. So we have another question here. why did we not flip the parking and the buffer for the lower section of Clarendon?
Yeah,
So-
so this was a few different people asked this, so
Okay.
we'll just combine it. So I think there's interest and excitement that the first part was, and then going on what's different in the lower part.
Okay, so, well, what we were alluding to a little bit in looking through this, what was the best fit design for this? Obviously, we were able to get in the protected bike lanes in these 3 sections, in these 3 blocks right here, from Rhodes to Pierce. So once we get beyond Pierce, it gets much more complicated in that there's a lot more changes to the alignment. You can see in this section from Ode, between Pierce and Ode, if we were to flip it as, the configuration with a protected bike lane, what would happen is that would pretty much cut off sight distance for people exiting Ode, because your parking is actually out further in the street. We might have been able to do it with 1 space, but if there's only 1 space, you're really not getting the protection afforded by having, it's not a true protected bike lane. Again, it's a safety and sight distance issue. The situation here in this section, basically it's a kind of inset area for parking, and the geometry didn't work out. If you're going to have the bike against this area and have the vehicles on the outside of it, again, geometrically didn't work out, especially if that transition for bicyclists to come along Clarendon Boulevard, because you don't want to have bicyclists coming out from behind parked vehicles. So these 2 sections, because of the curve changes, didn't really work out. But again, one of the main things we heard from you in the first round, and again, we look forward to additional comments, is providing that separation. And again, we're getting some separation here. So the bicyclists and the vehicles going along Clarendon Boulevard are not side by side. And we're forcing those vehicles, the motor vehicles, to make this kind of turn and yield to the bicyclists. We couldn't have done that if the parking were on the outside there. And then there's another related question at 17th Pavement, is they're concerned that the bike lane being closer to the curb will make it look like the cyclist is heading straight. That's a good question. So whenever we have a conflict area or an area where there might be potential confusion, again, we just mark it out more to restrict the maneuvers of everybody involved. So you can see the actual vehicle travel lane is about 11 feet here, whereas in the existing condition, it widens out to about 15 feet, okay? So we're repurposing a lot of that space to provide buffer between the through vehicle and bicyclists that are going along Clarendon Boulevard. The other thing that we do too, to help mitigate the effect that people might not really understand what direction the bicyclists are going, is putting in this green pavement. Putting in the green markings to help really emphasize that this is your bike connection. This is where you expect to see bicyclists. Okay.
Also, adding the yield markings there as well will help the driver see a bike coming through.
Yes, thank you, Maggie. So we got a question on Wilson. Why not put the bike lane at curb and protect it? So I will move to Wilson. You can see the overall design for Wilson is having a 12-foot driver lane against the median. Then you have this buffer space, bike lane, and parking on the outside. So you can see the lower and left is what I'm looking at for that cross section. We weren't able to get in a protected bike lane, like to basically put the bike lane on the inside and the parking on the outside, followed by the buffer and then the parking. We weren't able to do that because having the parking against this 12-foot lane and then having that 12-foot lane against the median violates the 20-foot clear width for the fire code. And obviously that's a constraint that we have to work with. So we weren't able to do that in this case because of that. So we kind of got the next best thing. Somebody asked about 4 spaces near the shopping center. Can they be removed? Does it make it difficult to pull out? We can look at site distance. You know, we can look at that and compare that to the occupancy data that we got, and that's something that we could do in a future enhancement. Again, I don't have an immediate answer, but that's something we can look at in more detail.
I will say though, in general, this design will help improve site distance because what you've done is add that bike lane with the buffer against it. So what used to be a lane and served vehicles is now a space that will not have vehicles in it. So it will help considerably increase the site distance. And then we can take a look at that one specifically in order to see if we think more needs to be done.
Okay. Yes, thanks for adding that. Another thing on Wilson. Okay, trying to get through these questions. So the question is, why not reduce vehicle lanes west of Patrick Henry? So basically, in terms of the volumes, and Sergio alluded to this, is the volumes are much greater to the west. We actually have a lot of vehicles that are going eastbound and turning left onto Patrick Henry. So it would be a more significant operational change if we were to do that. And again, we don't really have connecting facilities farther to the west. So because of the operational considerations and the linking to existing bike lanes, this is where we propose to drop the bike lanes. And one more Wilson question, were bus pullouts considered? Why were bus pullouts considered? Will these degrade transit level service? Obviously, we worked with transit on this, and given the volumes, that wasn't a concern that was noted. So that is something that we did coordinate with transit. Let's see, do you have
There was
other?
a related question for Wilson about wanting to know if we considered school buses when we were putting together.
Yes, we consider our basic design vehicle that we use is a bus.
Yeah.
Sometimes we use the art bus, school bus, whatever is kind of more appropriate, but they're very similar, and we make sure that they can both be accommodated.
Yeah. Jillian just notes that there will be additional school buses probably using the stretch of Wilson because of the new schools that are going to be happening over there. So, smart question.
Yep. Okay. There was a question about the parking availability. We don't have that right now. We do have a report that has that, and that's something that we can maybe provide through.
I think this person, let me see if I can find it. It was a specific question about on Wilson, the sort of parking.
I think I can jump into this. I think I saw it for parking west of Lebanon.
Yeah.
I mentioned stuff about east of Lebanon. I'll just say that I guess we have parking supply and net gains and losses on the plans, but west of Lebanon, we know that that's actually an area that doesn't have high turnover. That's mostly residential in that area on the north side, and on the south side, it's heavily used as well by some of the residential that is across the street on the north side. And we will not be removing any parking on the north side. On the south side, we are removing some 3 spaces, but we are gaining another 3 spaces just east of the park entrance. There's a park entrance right on Wilson Boulevard across Lebanon Street that cars should not be allowed to park in that area. So we kind of broke the block of the parking lane. And really looking at it, we don't have a loss along Wilson between Patrick Henry and Lebanon.
Thank you, Sergio. Very good. There's also a question on Wilson, why not add flex posts? And basically, we can't add flex posts because we have parking against the curb still. So, the flex post would obviously prohibit vehicles from going into those on-street parking spaces. Are there other questions?
There's a question for Wilson. I think wanting to know if there was a difference in the 85th percentile speed on Wilson. Is it different between the westbound and the eastbound? Do we look at that differently?
Sergeant, do you recall?
Not off the top of my head. You know, we can take a look at that though into more detail.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Quite a lot, actually.
Okay,
Yep.
some for Potomac.
Mhm.
I'm just going to try to address those.
So one of the questions we had was if we have enough space for essentially the double buffers, why not flip it and do a protected bike lane? Similar to Wilson, we had this same issue where we with the fire code, we have to keep that 20-foot clear. So if we put the parking lane up against the travel lane, where we have these the medians, and especially if this is a planted median, they look for that 20-foot clear throughout that whole section. So in order to kind of use up the space, that's where we came up with the double buffered concept, and that would comply with the fire code throughout this area. Another question we got was, why would we want to add more parking in this area? The answer to that one is on the northbound section. We look to add that protected bike lane because it's actually a physical barrier between the travelway and the bikes, which will actually provide better separation and more safety for the users instead of just having that hatched out. I think I saw another one was if we're going to provide bollards, particularly in the area with the on-street sidewalk. So the answer to that is yes. We're also looking into using a combination of vertical delineators. As a county, as a curb stops, we've been looking into those devices, and we haven't quite chosen one yet. But this would be a location that we would implement that. I think I saw another question about, and sorry about this, but the plan actually ended at Glebe, but that buffered bike lane goes all the way down to the driveway, just south of what's shown on screen, which currently the bike lane actually ends at Glebe. So with the addition of that bike lane, it does give cyclists the ability to travel down and connect down to the trail connections over there.
That was one of the questions we received as well.
Okay. Any more that you see pop up as?
Yeah, let's see. So there's a question.
Oh, wait, got a question here. If you don't have it, I think I got one here about the Virginia law change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm not really clear what the specific question is, but it sounds like it's the change of the Virginia law from a yield to a stop.
Right, but only at a marked crosswalk. So the question was, did we consider that when looking at places to put in crosswalks? Or I think specifically on Clarendon.
Specifically on Clarendon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have on Clarendon, we have crossings at almost every intersection. There is this longer block here where there's not a crossing. And there's really not the infrastructure that would support that right now, but that is something that, we can look at for future implementation, certainly. But yeah, most of the crossings on Clarendon are signal controlled, or many of them are.
I saw actually a question, right? She wanted to mention that on Potomac Avenue, when we actually worked with fire and we got an exception for the northbound side to put in that protected bike lane, because that also wouldn't adhere to fire code, but they were, since it was up against the tracks on that side, knowing that there will never be future development on the east side of Potomac, they allowed us to go and add that protected bike lane. And on this side, and since there's nothing on that stretch, you also won't have to worry about sidelines, driveways, etc.
Right.
Oh, and another thing I wanted to add on that, because I did see a question with east-west crossings. This is something we were looking into, but currently there aren't the infrastructure ramps to provide that, and that would require that construction happen. So it is something we're going to continue to look into and see if we can improve that, but it would not be tied to the repaving program of Potomac Ave.
Yep. And I have another question here. How will we maintain the paint and bollards?
Yeah.
They sometimes get destroyed.
Yeah, that was the shortened version of William's question, which was general question for all the county projects, which is kind of how do we maintain the light stripings, markings, paint, and bollards? Sometimes they get destroyed. And
Yeah. Well, I might even go out on a limb and say they get frequently destroyed. But we track those. We have mapping in GIS. We track those. Again, we try to replace them as as often as possible. We certainly do a run through a couple times a year, like at the beginning of the season and midway through the season. In the winter, we can't put them up really as much because the way that we use most of them is that we basically glue them down, and it's weather constrained as to when we can do that. But that is something that we do. And I will say overall with a lot of these things, and you'll probably notice some locations at Quincy, you'll notice that we're building out some of the areas where we put out bollards with curb with concrete. So we're kind of prioritizing areas where there's needed pedestrian refuge, but you'll see conversions over time of some of those areas where there's a lot of bollards, so that it's less of a maintenance thing and it provides an extra degree of buffer and protection for people that are using the facilities. Oh, and there's another question which is too small print for me to read.
It was more of a question on finding the fire code.
Oh.
Oncoming traffic.
We can attempt to. Again, we're not specialists in fire operations, unfortunately. So whenever we look at designs and potential designs that we're considering, we meet with our partners in fire department to understand those constraints better. So all these projects that we're discussing today, we did talk to fire department with. So they've already been pre-vetted with fire department. But basically the 20 feet is to ensure access. Most is my best understanding. If it's 12 feet, it's easy for a broken down vehicle to block a lane and then you restrict access in the case of an emergency. 20 feet provides space for bypass and for access. We did protected bike lanes. Obviously, it's not an issue on Clarendon because you have 2 lanes side by side. We did Beach a few years ago, and that wasn't a problem either because there's no median. But anytime you have a median and other physical hard barriers, that presents access issues for fire. So that's the best we can explain it without being technical, really going into deep how they do their operations.
And then I guess I'd just add to that, the medians, that's considered an object. It's even if, it's got a curve, that's what they do the measurement to. They don't consider that to be something they can mount and go around.
Right, exactly.
And that's a Virginia statewide code.
Yep, that is.
So I think this is a good question to address. Alan or Eileen, sorry if I got your name wrong, lives in Bluemont next to the part that already has the 2 lanes, and they note that there's a center turn lane. So the question is, why can't we rip up the median strip and make a center turn lane?
That's a good question. That's something that we looked into the possibility of doing. Given the scope of this project, which is pretty much repaving. We didn't see that was feasible. Part of the challenges of ripping up this median is its length and that it is used to divert stormwater. And, you know, not to get too technical, but the road is double crowned, meaning each side of the roadway has a specific grade to help promote drainage. And that drainage goes to that median area. So it's not like you could rip it out and then just put pavement over, which we do at times. I know you've probably seen us do that at times where we can. This we couldn't do it because it does have the complex stormwater. And anytime you deal with changing stormwater, then you know it's a whole different scale type project because you have to dig up the street, etc. It becomes you know, trifold, maybe even tenfold in terms of cost. But that is something that we did look at, and you know, unfortunately, we're constrained by that right now.
And I know it's something that has been talked about with this neighborhood in terms of a capital improvement project plan, and so that's a different team than sort of what we're working with. We're working on those sort of short-term improvements. This work doesn't preclude that possibility, and in fact is even a sort of test run for making effective changes.
Right, and that's a good way of looking at it too. It is kind of a test run to see how well the two-lane operations work. And you know, we are analyzing other future things on Wilson too that could be potential improvements, such as you know, potential signal upgrades and other things. But for the scope of what we're looking at now is pretty much just the paving and remarking.
All right. We've got a few more questions in here, but I know we're at time, and so I do want to respect folks' time this evening. But I appreciate you guys asking all these questions. We will have these concept plans up on the project page and the website. If you have location-specific questions, again, please add those as comments using the Conveo tool and share your feedback via the SurveyMonkey tool. If you want to make sure that you get that and you're not already on the stakeholder list, if you drop your email in the question box, I will add you to it. And yeah, we really appreciate your time. You guys helped make the feedback we got the first time around really helped make the concept plans what they are, and look forward to additional comments.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you for your time and input.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you.